I'm Sarah, a 29-year-old woman, sitting in a courtroom and watching my husband of 6 years grin while signing our divorce papers. Michael had always assumed I was nothing more than a naive girl from a small town with no real ambition. What he never realized was that while he was busy having an affair with his coworker, I had quietly been building a business empire behind the scenes. Now the judge was preparing to read my financial statement, and I could hardly wait to watch the confidence fade from Michael's face. But before I explain how my soon-to-be ex-husband's smug expression completely vanished, let me know where you're watching from, and don't forget to like and subscribe if you've ever had to prove your strength when everyone underestimated you. I grew up in a small town in Tennessee before moving to Nashville to study accounting at Vanderbilt University. Even though my upbringing was modest, I carried big dreams of building a career in corporate finance. My parents taught me early on the importance of discipline, hard work, and saving money, lessons that would later become some of my greatest advantages. I first met Michael in a coffee shop near campus. I was focused on preparing for a difficult financial analysis exam when he walked over to my table. He was in his third year of law school, came from a wealthy and respected Nashville family of attorneys, and carried himself with the kind of confidence that only comes from never having to struggle financially. "You have potential. You just need the right guidance," he told me while glancing at my accounting books spread across the table. At the time, I interpreted it as encouragement. Looking back now, I understand it was both a subtle insult and an early glimpse into the dynamic that would define our relationship. Michael seemed perfect in every way: successful, charismatic, ambitious, and genuinely interested in me despite my ordinary background. Our relationship moved quickly. He introduced me to upscale restaurants I could never have afforded on my own, planned romantic weekends in Gatlinburg, and exposed me to a luxurious lifestyle I had previously only seen in films. Yet even in the beginning, he constantly tried to reshape me. He criticized the clothes I bought from Target, suggested I change my hairstyle to look more sophisticated, and frequently made comments implying my college friends lacked culture and ambition. At the time, I worked part-time as an accounting assistant at a small local firm. I genuinely loved the work, the challenge of solving financial problems, and the satisfaction that came from making complicated numbers fit together perfectly. Michael, however, dismissed it as my little job and often insisted that I didn't need a career at all. "Why tire yourself out for pennies when I can provide everything you need?" he would say, never understanding that my work represented more than income. It was tied to my independence, my goals, and my sense of identity. After a year and a half together, Michael proposed during another carefully planned weekend in Gatlinburg. The diamond ring was breathtaking, the champagne expensive, and the entire proposal designed like a scene from a movie. People nearby even applauded when I accepted. It felt like living inside a fairy tale, and I said yes without a second thought. We eventually married in a small ceremony in Savannah, a choice I insisted on despite his family's preference for a much more extravagant wedding in Nashville. Looking back, that decision was one of the rare moments when I truly stood my ground against the expectations of the Shannon family. At least it was held somewhere respectable, even if it was simple. His mother, Margaret, remarked with a polite smile that never quite reached her eyes. That was the first moment I truly understood how his family saw me, as someone beneath their standards and unworthy of their son. After our honeymoon in the Caribbean, we settled into Michael's home in Belmead, one of Nashville's wealthiest neighborhoods. The house was elegant, expensive, and emotionally cold, much like the family itself. I tried to make it feel warm and personal by adding framed photos, colorful paintings, and plants, but Michael preferred a minimalist style that emphasized wealth rather than comfort or personality. The cracks in our marriage began appearing almost immediately. Michael criticized nearly every decorating choice I made, questioned the people I spent time with, and constantly belittled my profession. "Accounting is so ordinary," he once told me after meeting some of my coworkers. "You could become something extraordinary, but instead you're wasting your talent balancing books for companies nobody has heard of." I did my best to fit into his social world. I attended dinners and events with the wives of wealthy lawyers and executives, women who spent most of their days shopping, attending spas, or organizing charity galas. They were always polite to my face, but I never truly felt accepted among them. At one dinner party, I overheard one of the women jokingly describe me as Michael's experiment with the middle class. Instead of defending me, Michael later suggested that maybe I simply needed to work harder to fit in, perhaps by improving my wardrobe or learning to play tennis. They just need to see that you belong, he told me, without realizing how deeply those words hurt. Michael always framed it as though I was simply trying to adjust to their world, speaking as if my personality and background were flaws that needed reshaping. Those first years of marriage became a strange combination of luxury and emotional isolation. I was surrounded by expensive gifts and a glamorous lifestyle, yet inside I felt my confidence and sense of self slowly disappearing. Little by little, I was transforming into exactly what Michael wanted, a polished trophy wife who enhanced his image, while the ambitious and independent woman I once was began to fade into the background. By the second year of our marriage, the tension that had quietly existed beneath the surface could no longer be ignored. Michael had always been extremely particular about money, but over time his behavior crossed the line from cautious to controlling. Even though we shared bank accounts, he analyzed nearly every purchase I made while freely spending enormous amounts on himself without ever consulting me. "Did you really need another stack of professional development books?" he would ask while reviewing the credit card statement. "That's $150 that could have been invested instead." At the same time, he never hesitated to spend thousands of dollars on luxury watches, golf memberships, or exclusive clubs for himself. Slowly, I became more isolated from the people who mattered most to me. Trips back home to visit my parents in small-town Tennessee became increasingly rare because Michael always seemed to have a reason to avoid going. Sometimes it was a business function, other times a client dinner, and occasionally he simply dismissed my hometown by saying, "Rural Tennessee is far too provincial for me." My college friends eventually stopped reaching out after Michael repeatedly made it obvious that he considered them beneath his standards. After hosting a dinner party one evening, he mocked my friend Jessica afterward. She actually asked whether the wine was from California, he said with a laugh of disbelief, as if we'd ever served domestic wine to guests. "That's embarrassing, Sarah." The career I had once been proud of slowly became another source of conflict between us. When my company offered me a promotion to senior accountant, instead of celebrating my success, Michael questioned whether it was even worthwhile. "Is a slightly higher salary really worth spending more time away from home?" he asked. "We're supposed to start thinking about having children soon, remember?" That caught me completely off guard because whenever I had previously mentioned starting a family, he insisted the timing wasn't right. Around that same period, I discovered a growing passion for financial consulting. The accounting firm where I worked was expanding into advisory services and strategic planning, and I volunteered to learn everything I could about that side of the business. To my surprise, I turned out to have a strong instinct for recognizing investment trends and building financial strategies that produced impressive results for clients. Excited by this new direction, I eventually shared my dream with Michael. I told him that one day I hoped to open my own boutique financial consulting company. His reaction crushed me immediately. "Sarah, you need to be realistic," he said dismissively. "Running a business takes real business instincts, and honestly, that's not exactly your strongest skill. Besides, most startups fail within their first year anyway. Why gamble with the life we already have?" Our attitudes toward money revealed how fundamentally different we truly were. Michael valued appearances above everything else: the prestigious address, the luxury car, the expensive vacations, all carefully chosen to project the image of success. I, on the other hand, came from a middle-class background where financial security mattered more than appearances. I believed in saving responsibly, investing intelligently, and looking for long-term value instead of chasing status symbols. As our third wedding anniversary approached, Michael's late nights at the office became increasingly common. There was always another excuse: an important client meeting, market research, quarterly reports, or urgent legal work. The explanations constantly changed, But one thing remained the same. He was rarely home. Most evenings, I ate dinner by myself. I went to sleep alone. Gradually, my life started resembling that of a single woman, except I still lived under the financial control and scrutiny of someone who treated me more like a dependent child than a partner. Our first major fight happened after his family's annual Christmas gathering. During the drive home, his mother had once again asked when we planned on giving her grandchildren. I casually replied that I was ready whenever Michael was, but he quickly redirected the conversation before I could say more. Later that night, when we were finally home alone, I confronted him about it. His response was distant and emotionless. "Children are an enormous responsibility financially," he said while loosening his tie. "Considering your modest career and the expectations of my family, any child we have would need trust funds, private schools, and the right social connections. We're simply not financially prepared yet." "Not financially prepared?" I asked in disbelief. "Michael, you earn six figures, and your family has generational wealth. What exactly are we waiting for?" His answer revealed more than he probably intended. "My income isn't the issue," he replied coldly. "You still haven't properly established yourself. What exactly would you contribute to our child's future?" His words stayed with me for days. The way he constantly minimized my career, calling my salary insignificant during arguments, finally forced me to confront a painful truth. I needed financial independence, not only for my future, but for my own mental and emotional well-being. That same week, I quietly opened a separate bank account at another bank. I arranged for a small portion of my paycheck to be deposited there directly. It wasn't enough for Michael to notice if he reviewed our shared finances, but it was enough for me to slowly begin building something that belonged entirely to me. At the same time, I became obsessed with learning everything I could about financial independence and entrepreneurship. I read investing books late into the night, enrolled in free online business management courses, and subscribed to newsletters focused on startups, wealth building, and long-term financial. I handled all of this carefully in private browsing mode, making sure not to leave behind any digital traces that Michael could stumble upon. The woman who had once been dazzled by luxury dinners and extravagant gestures was finally beginning to recognize the golden cage she had been trapped inside. Quietly and patiently, I started planning my way out, one careful step at a time. While Michael continued spending long nights away at work, I focused on building the groundwork for my independence. Using the savings I had secretly accumulated in my separate account, I officially registered a small company called Sarah Mitchell Financial Solutions. I also created a clean, professional website that highlighted my experience, services, and growing portfolio. The biggest obstacle was finding time to work on my business without raising Michael's suspicions. I transformed our rarely used guest bedroom into a small office, telling him I needed a quiet space for continuing education courses that would help me advance at my accounting firm. He hardly paid attention to the change, brushing off my professional ambitions as harmless and cute rather than taking them seriously. "Just make sure it doesn't interfere with our social commitments," was the only comment he made. My first client came into my life purely by chance, a neighborhood coffee shop. I overheard a woman named Elena Rodriguez, who owned a fast-growing catering company, venting to her business partner about how expensive financial consultants were. "I can't spend $10,000 on a financial strategy," she said frustratedly. "But I know money is slipping through the cracks somewhere, and I can't figure out why." I introduced myself, explained my accounting and advisory background, and offered to help her at a much lower cost since I was still building my client portfolio. Elena decided to take a chance on me, and the outcome exceeded both of our expectations. After reviewing her business operations, I discovered several inefficiencies in her cash flow management, renegotiated vendor payment structures, and designed an investment plan for her profits. Within the first quarter alone, her returns increased by nearly 40%. The improvement in her business was so dramatic that Elena immediately began recommending me to other small business owners she knew. Working with her gave me far more than just my first professional success story. It also gave me a genuine friendship, something I had been missing for years in the carefully curated social world Michael preferred. Elena was sincere, hardworking, and valued my intelligence in a way my husband never had. "You truly have a talent for this, Sarah," she told me during coffee one afternoon. "You understand money in a way that actually helps ordinary people create real wealth. Never let anyone convince you otherwise." As Michael's business trips became more frequent, I spent more nights secretly working on my growing company. I even converted part of our walk-in closet into a temporary office for client calls, hanging thick blankets around the walls to muffle the sound. Every new client brought a mix of excitement and fear. Excitement because my business was steadily expanding. Fear because if Michael discovered what I was doing, it would inevitably lead to confrontation. The process of learning how to run a company was intense. I made plenty of mistakes in the beginning, charging too little for difficult projects, misjudging timelines, and occasionally taking on more work than I could realistically handle. But with every challenge, I improved. Each client taught me something valuable about entrepreneurship, professional boundaries, and recognizing the worth of my own expertise. I invested my growing savings in a necessary software, certifications, and business tools, carefully disguising the purchases among regular household expenses or paying with cash whenever possible. Over the course of a year, my client base expanded steadily, mostly through referrals and word-of-mouth recommendations. Instead of spending the profits I earned, I reinvested nearly all of them back into business while also setting aside part of the money for long-term investments. Meanwhile, Michael remained completely unaware of what was happening. He assumed my growing confidence came from finally adapting to the lifestyle he wanted for me, rather than from the professional fulfillment and independence I was quietly building behind the scenes. One major turning point came after I worked with the founder of a technology startup. Following my financial restructuring recommendations, her company secured a major round of funding. The success story was later featured in a Nashville business magazine. Although I declined to have my name included for privacy reasons, the project gave me credibility and opened the door to much larger clients. Through Elena, I was eventually introduced to Patricia Chun, an experienced entrepreneur who had previously sold a company for 8 figures and was now launching a fintech startup. She initially hired me for a relatively small consulting project, but over time she became one of my most important clients and mentors. "You're seriously underpricing yourself," she told me bluntly after reviewing my consulting rates. "Triple your fees and watch how differently people perceive your value." She turned out to be absolutely right. When I increased my prices, I didn't lose business. Instead, I began attracting more established companies that were willing to pay premium rates for high-quality expertise. Patricia also introduced me to the world of angel investing and advanced portfolio strategy. "Money loses value when it sits idle," she explained. "You need to put your money to work instead of letting it sleep in an account." Under her mentorship, I started making strategic investments in promising startups, including Patricia's newest venture, which specialized in AI-driven financial technology solutions. Patricia's company focused on developing AI-powered financial planning technology. I began investing cautiously at first, contributing only small amounts of money. But as my consulting business expanded, my investment portfolio grew alongside it. Watching both my company and investment succeed was thrilling in a way I had never experienced before. For the first time since marrying Michael, I finally felt genuinely alive, independent, and driven by purpose. Everything I was building came from my own intelligence, determination, and hard work. Throughout all of this, I continued maintaining the image everyone expected to see at social events: Michael's polished and supportive wife. I smiled politely while the wives of his coworkers discussed luxury shopping trips, charity boards, and vacation homes. I attended his corporate dinners, played the role of the perfect spouse flawlessly, and never gave anyone reason to suspect that behind the scenes I was running a successful business from home while managing investments that were slowly changing my entire future. Living this double life was emotionally exhausting, yet deeply empowering at the same time. Every new client, every successful consultation, and every profitable investment return brought me one step closer to the freedom I was beginning to realize I didn't just want from my marriage, I desperately needed it. For years into our marriage, however, The illusion we had built together finally began to crack. It started with a text message appearing on Michael's phone while he was in the shower. A preview notification flashed across the lock screen from someone listed simply as A. The visible part of the message read, "Missing you already." Last night was. Before I could read the rest, the notification disappeared. But it was enough to plant a suspicion in my mind that I could no longer ignore. Michael had already been acting unusually distant for months. He often returned home carrying the scent of unfamiliar perfume, casually explaining it away by claiming he had hugged female colleagues goodbye after networking events. Instead of confronting him immediately, I chose to investigate quietly. I started paying attention to patterns. The Thursday evening meetings that somehow always lasted past 9 o'clock. The weekend conferences connected to organizations with no online presence I could find. The sudden increase in client dinners supposedly taking place at the same upscale downtown restaurant. The following Thursday, I told Michael I was helping Elena with a large corporate event for her catering company. In reality, I parked near the restaurant he frequently mentioned and waited. At exactly 8:30 p.m., Michael's BMW entered the parking lot. About 10 minutes later, a red Mercedes arrived. A blonde woman stepped out, and even from a distance I immediately recognized her. It was Amanda Walsh, one of his colleagues from the law firm. I watched them greet each other with an intimacy that clearly went far beyond professionalism. Then I saw Michael kiss her in the parking lot before they walked inside together. My hands trembled as I raised my phone and took several photos. My stomach felt hollow with a mixture of heartbreak, betrayal, and painful confirmation. I waited 30 minutes before entering the restaurant myself. They were seated together in a quiet corner booth, leaning toward each other intimately, Michael's hand resting on hers. I walked toward their table silently, my heartbeat pounding so loudly it felt impossible that nobody else could hear it. "So, this is what those late meetings really are?" I said calmly, surprising even myself with how steady my voice sounded. Michael immediately pulled his hand away and looked up in shock. His expression shifted rapidly, from panic to guilt and finally to irritation at being caught. Amanda, at least, looked ashamed. She grabbed her purse awkwardly and muttered something about needing to use the restroom before quickly leaving the table. "Sarah, this isn't what it looks like," Michael said, slipping into the same smooth, controlled tone he used with difficult legal clients. "Really?" I replied, "because from where I'm standing, it looks exactly like you're having a romantic dinner with your girlfriend while your wife believes you're still at work." The conversation that followed felt surreal. Michael gave a weak apology, insisted the affair was only physical, and somehow even managed to suggest that I shared responsibility for his betrayal. "You've become obsessed with your little accounting projects," he said quietly as nearby diners started noticing the tension between us. "You've become boring, Sarah. Uninspired. When was the last time you actually put effort into this marriage?" I left the restaurant alone. I spent hours driving around the city without direction before finally returning home. Michael came back shortly after midnight. He promised to end the affair, suggested couples therapy, and even proposed taking a second honeymoon together. For reasons I didn't entirely understand at the time, I pretended to consider giving him another chance. "I need time," I told him honestly. What I meant was that I needed time, not to forgive him, but to carefully prepare my next move. The weeks afterward became an exhausting performance from both of us. Michael temporarily transformed into an attentive husband again, bringing flowers home, planning date nights, and acting affectionate. Meanwhile, I quietly scheduled consultations with divorce attorneys during the hours he believed I was meeting with clients. One of those attorneys was Rebecca Torres, a highly respected divorce lawyer recommended to me by Patricia. During our first meeting, Rebecca explained the reality of my situation in direct, practical terms. "Tennessee follows equitable distribution laws," she told me. "Without a prenuptial agreement, marital assets are divided based on what the court considers fair, which doesn't always mean a 50-50 split." Through Rebecca, I began understanding just how financially complicated divorcing someone like Michael would become, especially given the influence and generational wealth of his family. She emphasized the importance of documenting everything carefully. Information is leverage, Rebecca explained, especially during a divorce. I threw myself into quietly gathering records, organizing financial documents, and preparing for what I knew was coming. But my careful investigation and planning came to an abrupt stop the moment Michael discovered something he was never supposed to find. Marital property in marriage was generally considered subject to division, but Rebecca identified a possible exception in my situation based on a key detail. Michael had actively discouraged my business from the very beginning and had offered absolutely no financial or practical support during its creation. "We'll disclose everything at the appropriate time," she reassured me. "For now, we let him believe the version of events he's already convinced himself of." While the legal proceedings slowly moved forward, Michael began a social campaign against me. Mutual friends started avoiding my calls. Invitations to gatherings and social events stopped coming altogether. Even neighbors who had once been warm and friendly became distant and overly formal in their interactions. Eventually, I learned the truth. Michael had been spreading a carefully constructed story, that I had been unfaithful, that I was emotionally unstable, and that he was the one pursuing divorce despite exhausting every effort to save our marriage. In the social circles influenced by his family's reputation, his version was accepted without question. The emotional impact of this quiet social rejection was deeper than I expected. People I had celebrated holidays with, shared personal milestones with, and trusted for years suddenly disappeared from my life, all based on Michael's fabricated narrative. The only exceptions were Elena and Patricia, who remained unwavering in their support. "Anyone who believes rumors without hearing both sides doesn't deserve your attention," Elena told me one evening over pastries in her catering kitchen after a particularly draining day. "Focus on building what comes next, not mourning what's already gone." As Michael realized I had no intention of accepting his terms quietly, his intimidation tactics escalated. He made late-night phone calls filled with thinly veiled threats, hinting that he would ensure I would never be able to work in the city again. At one point, he even suggested he might report my business for tax violations. It was an empty threat. My financial records were meticulously organized and fully documented. His family also joined the pressure campaign. His mother, Margaret, contacted me directly in an attempt to reason with me. "We always knew you weren't the right match for Michael," she said coldly, her tone layered with superiority. "But we accepted you because he chose you. Don't make this difficult, Sarah. Take what you're being offered and walk away with dignity." I remained composed throughout every interaction, a skill I had perfected over years of enduring subtle insults and condescension at Shannon family events. "Thank you for your concern, Margaret," I replied calmly. "I'll be following my attorney's advice." Michael's growing arrogance began to work against him. Convinced I lacked the financial resources to sustain a prolonged legal battle, he made several critical mistakes. He failed to properly disclose investment accounts that I already had records of. He significantly underreported the value of his stock portfolio. He also attempted to classify certain assets as separate property, even though they had clearly been purchased using marital funds. Rebecca documented every discrepancy with precision, systematically building a case that would eventually damage his credibility in court. Meanwhile, my own business experienced explosive growth during the separation period. A financial restructuring strategy one designed for a regional restaurant chain helped them avoid bankruptcy entirely and triple their profits, leading to coverage in several industry publications. Although I declined interview requests for personal reasons, the professional exposure brought in a surge of new clients. The turning point came when I secured a major contract with a national retail corporation to completely overhaul their financial strategy, a six-figure deal that elevated my firm from successful to highly influential. I hired 4 employees, leased professional office space in downtown Nashville, and began turning away clients whose values didn't align with the direction of my company. All of this unfolded while Michael and his legal team continued to portray me as an inexperienced bookkeeper financially dependent on her husband. In his mind, I was still the naive small-town woman he had once believed he was rescuing through wealth and status. That belief had become so deeply ingrained that he could not imagine any version of reality in which I was succeeding without him. During this same period, Patricia introduced me to a network of angel investors seeking promising fintech opportunities. My blend of real-world financial expertise and forward-thinking technology concepts impressed them enough to secure seed funding for a financial planning application I had been developing. The platform, powered by artificial intelligence to deliver personalized financial guidance for individuals and small businesses, launched in beta testing to overwhelmingly positive feedback. Within 6 months, it had reached 50,000 active users and was already attracting acquisition interest from major financial institutions. At the same time, I expanded my investment strategy, using both my professional network and financial knowledge to identify early-stage startups with strong growth potential. My portfolio diversified rapidly across multiple sectors, including technology. Here is your fully rephrased continuation in English, keeping the same meaning and length without reducing detail. Real estate and emerging markets, all carefully managed with a strategy designed to maximize returns while reducing exposure to unnecessary risk. The night before our final court hearing, I found myself alone in the house that had long since stopped feeling like a home, reflecting on everything that had brought me to this point. For years earlier, I had been so focused on meeting Michael's expectations that I slowly began to lose sight of who I was. His betrayal, as painful as it had been, ultimately forced me to rediscover my ambition, my independence, and my sense of self-worth. That evening, I packed a small overnight bag. Regardless of how the judge ruled the next day, I had already made the decision that I would not spend another night in the place where my marriage had fallen apart. My new penthouse apartment was ready, purchased through an LLC that Michael had no knowledge of, and furnished with pieces chosen for comfort, elegance, and meaning rather than social status. As I closed my bag, my phone lit up with a message from Patricia. Remember who you are tomorrow, not who we try to make you become. Holding those words close, I prepared myself for the final chapter of my marriage to Michael Shannon. The morning of the court date arrived bright and clear. I dressed in a navy blue suit, formal, modest, yet quietly powerful, and wore a single piece of jewelry, a small diamond pendant gifted by Elena and Patricia to celebrate the second anniversary of my business. They had called it my Independence Diamond. I arrived at the courthouse 30 minutes early, just as Rebecca had advised. Michael was already there. He stood confidently in an expensive charcoal suit, accompanied by his attorney, David Harrison. David was a senior partner at one of Nashville's most elite law firms, known for his aggressive tactics in divorce cases involving wealthy clients. Michael noticed me and smirked, leaning toward David to whisper something that made both men chuckle. His confidence was unmistakable. In his mind, this was nothing more than a procedural step before his inevitable victory. Rebecca arrived shortly after, composed and immaculate in a deep burgundy suit that stood out subtly in the courthouse's muted environment. Unlike David, who was surrounded by junior associates and assistants, Rebecca worked alone with focused precision and quiet authority. Her presence alone had always reassured me. "Ready?" she asked calmly, her expression unreadable to anyone watching. "More than ready," I replied. Judge Catherine Williams presided over the courtroom. She was a woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair and sharp, observant eyes. Known for her strict fairness and zero tolerance for theatrics, she commanded immediate respect. As the proceedings began, Michael performed as though he were on stage. His testimony painted him as the devoted husband who had supported his wife's modest ambitions, only to be met with ingratitude and unreasonable demands during divorce proceedings. "Your Honor, I simply want a fair resolution," he said, carefully controlling his tone to appear reasonable and restrained. "I have offered Mrs. Shannon a generous settlement that allows her to maintain a comfortable lifestyle while she rebuilds her career." David followed with their formal presentation, arguing for division of assets in a way that favored Michael. He emphasized his family wealth as separate property, downplayed my contributions to our shared financial growth, and argued that the house, primarily funded through Michael's earnings, should remain solely his. Throughout their entire presentation, I remained still and composed, giving nothing away, neither emotion nor reaction. Judge Williams occasionally glanced in my direction, her expression carefully neutral. When it came time for Michael to sign the initial divorce decree separating our marital status, while financial matters remained unresolved, he made a deliberate show of it. He signed with exaggerated confidence, even letting out a short laugh as he capped his expensive pen. As he returned to his seat, he leaned slightly toward me and whispered, "Enjoy going back to your parents' farm." Rebecca began her case with a completely different tone, controlled, precise, and deeply methodical. Unlike David's dramatic presentation, hers was built on structure and undeniable documentation. She introduced evidence of Michael's financial misconduct during the marriage, undisclosed accounts, excessive spending on Amanda, and a consistent pattern of financial control and concealment. "Your Honor," Rebecca stated clearly, "Mr. Shannon has failed to fully disclose marital assets as required under Tennessee law." She submitted detailed documentation, including account numbers, transaction histories, and estimated balances tied to previously hidden financial holdings. Michael shifted uncomfortably in his seat. His earlier confidence began to fracture as he exchanged uneasy glances with David. David immediately requested a brief recess. "I'm going to deny that request," Judge Williams responded firmly. "We will proceed. I am particularly interested in these undisclosed assets." The tension in the courtroom intensified as Rebecca continued methodically dismantling the financial narrative Michael had constructed. Judge Williams's expression grew increasingly serious as the evidence accumulated. "Furthermore, Your Honor," Rebecca continued, "we asked the court to recognize Mrs. Shannon's separate property established during the marriage, created entirely without financial support or contribution from Mr. Shannon or his family." This was the exact moment we had been preparing for. Judge Williams lifted her gaze from her notes and spoke calmly. "Counselor, please elaborate." Rebecca stood composed. "Mrs. Shannon established a financial consulting firm during the marriage. Mr. Shannon not only refused to support this venture, but actively discouraged it and repeatedly dismissed her professional ambitions, as demonstrated in these communications." She then submitted a series of emails and text messages in which Michael had referred to my business as nothing more than a hobby and repeatedly belittled my entrepreneurial intentions. The judge carefully reviewed the evidence before turning her attention directly to me for the first time. "Mrs. Shannon," she said, "the court requires full financial disclosure from both parties. Have you submitted complete information regarding this business?" "Not yet, Your Honor," I replied, "exactly as we had planned. My full financial disclosure is ready for submission today." Rebecca then handed a sealed envelope to the court clerk containing my complete financial statement, the document we had intentionally withheld until this precise moment. "I request that the court review Mrs. Shannon's financial disclosure before making any determinations regarding asset division," Rebecca stated. Judge Williams nodded and opened the envelope herself. The courtroom fell completely silent as she read through the contents. Her expression remained controlled, though her eyebrows lifted slightly, the only visible sign of surprise from the otherwise composed judge. After what felt like an extended silence, she looked up. "For the record, I will now read the summary of Mrs. Shannon's assets." My heart pounded as she began. "Sarah Mitchell Financial Solutions, a financial consulting firm established 3 years ago. Current valuation based on revenue, contracts, and intellectual property, $2,100,000. Michael's head snapped upward instantly, his expression collapsing into disbelief. "Investment portfolio including technology equities, real estate holdings, and startup investments, $11,900,000. Michael's hands tightened on the table, his knuckles turning white. "Real estate assets, 2 properties acquired within the past 18 months, valued at approximately $1,200,000. By this point, Michael looked visibly unwell, his face drained of color, his posture rigid with shock. Beside him, David leaned in urgently, whispering, but Michael appeared unable to absorb what he was hearing. Total disclosed assets, $15,200,000, Judge Williams concluded. The courtroom fell into complete silence. Michael stared directly at me, as though I were someone he no longer recognized. In that moment, I felt no celebration, no revenge, only a deep, quiet sense of relief that the truth was finally on the record. Judge Williams broke the silence. Mr. Shannon, do you wish to amend any of your prior statements regarding Mrs. Shannon's financial dependence? Michael did not respond. He seemed incapable of speech. David rose quickly. Your Honor, we were not aware of these assets. We argue that since they were acquired during the marriage, Mr. Shannon is entitled to an equitable share. Rebecca had anticipated this exact argument. Your Honor, she said, we draw the court's attention to the prenuptial agreement executed by both parties prior to marriage, specifically Clause 15. This was our decisive advantage. When Rebecca had carefully reviewed our prenup years after it was signed, she discovered a clause originally inserted by Michael's own legal team. Any business enterprise created by either spouse during the marriage, without capital contribution from the other spouse, shall remain separate property in the event of divorce. The clause was likely designed to protect Mr. Shannon's own future ventures, Rebecca explained, but its wording applies equally to Mrs. Shannon's business, which she built entirely without any financial input from Mr. Shannon. Judge Williams examined the agreement closely and nodded. The language is clear. Ms. Torres, proceed. Rebecca then detailed how I had built my company entirely from personal savings, reinvested profits, and independent effort, all while Michael consistently discouraged and undermined my ambitions. She presented statements from clients and mentors confirming my work, leadership, and independent business development. Throughout her argument, I watched Michael, the man who had once laughed confidently while signing our divorce papers, now sitting motionless, his arrogance completely dismantled. Amanda, seated quietly in the gallery, stood without a word and left the courtroom, her expression unreadable. Judge Williams took 20 minutes to review every document before returning with her final ruling. Her voice, when she spoke, was firm and decisive. Based on the evidence presented and the terms of the prenuptial agreement, the court finds that Sarah Mitchell Financial Solutions, along with the associated investment portfolio, constitutes separate property belonging solely to Mrs. Shannon. A strangled sound escaped Michael, half gasp, half protest. Furthermore, the judge continued, due to Mr. Shannon's failure to fully disclose marital assets as required by law, the court finds cause to adjust the division of remaining marital property in favor of Mrs. Shannon. The remainder of her ruling blurred into legal terminology, but the outcome was unmistakable. I would retain my business, my investments, and my properties. On top of that, I would receive a significantly larger share of the remaining marital estate due to Michael's misrepresentation. The house would be sold, and the proceeds divided according to a formula that heavily favored me. As we rose to leave, Michael suddenly stepped toward me, restrained only partially by his attorney. You planned all of this, he spat, his face twisted with anger and humiliation. All these years, you were just waiting to destroy me. I looked at the man I once loved, now reduced to someone consumed entirely by his own narrative of victimhood. No, Michael, I said quietly. I built something while you were busy destroying what we had. That's the difference between us. Rebecca gently guided me away as Michael remained standing alone in the nearly empty courtroom, the remnants of his certainty scattered around him. Walking out of the courthouse felt less like winning and more like finally breathing again. Each step down the marble stairs lifted the weight of years of secrecy, manipulation, and emotional exhaustion. Today, my company has expanded internationally. My investments continue to grow steadily, and I have used my resources to establish a foundation dedicated to helping women achieve financial independence. Michael attempted reconciliation after discovering my true net worth, but by then I had already moved far beyond the woman who once sought his validation. If you're facing your own moment of doubt, betrayal, or underestimation, remember this. What feels like an ending is often the beginning of something stronger. Your value is never defined by someone else's inability to recognize it. Have you ever been underestimated and proven someone wrong in a powerful way? Share your experience in the comments. And if this story resonated with you, like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to remember their worth is not defined by others. Thank you for following my journey. And remember, sometimes losing what you thought you needed is exactly what leads you to what you truly deserve.